Last week, Press Secretary Sean Spicer, in miraculously one of his strangest moments of his tenure thus far, justified Trump's decision to bomb Syria by arguing that, quote, even Hitler didn't use chemical weapons. While he endeavored to clarify what he meant, he referred to concentration camps as Holocaust centers. It's certainly a shame that our current press secretary, a man whose literally one job is to be good with words, is so dreadful with words. But it's no more shocking than the fact that a man who wanted to abolish the EPA was on a short list to be in charge of the EPA, so Spicer certainly doesn't rank first among mind-blowing Trump appointments, or almost appointments. That aside, watching Spicer's comments, I, like so many other people, sat there being like, what? Do you know what happened in the Holocaust? I mean, for one thing, there were actual gas chambers. And for another thing, it was the Holocaust. I actually thought back to a line from Elie Wiesel's book Night, a memoir about Wiesel's time in Auschwitz, in which he describes how, quote, infants were tossed into the air and used as targets for the machine guns. To this day, that is the most shocking and disturbing thing I have ever heard. But it's interesting, because the last time I thought about that line specifically, I was a junior at a very liberal college, and an anti-Israel protest was going on. The protests were making Nazi comparisons and talking about the Israeli genocide, as these protests often do. There was a student carrying a sign that said, Israel tests its weapons on Palestinian children. It was that sign specifically that reminded me of the line from Night. Nazi machine guns targeting Jewish babies, Israeli weapons targeting Palestinian children. Except the comparison is absurd. Hamas and other terrorist groups and nations around the Middle East have called for the destruction of Israel. So the one-sided dogmatism of the anti-Israel narrative is deeply troubling, and most importantly, antithetical to peace, as it makes an historically deeply persecuted people feel even more so. It is why many Israeli citizens flock, unfortunately, to leaders like Netanyahu, who project strength and security. There is a lot to be horrified by when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lot of atrocities on Israel's part. It is more than fair to criticize Israel's disproportionate use of force, just not to do it disproportionately. Last week, members of the Student Senate at my alma mater, Tufts University, passed a resolution that called for the university to divest from 4 companies that it says are complicit in the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Fine. Clearly, the settlements violate international law and are at odds with a two-state solution. But debate over the resolution was held the night before Passover. In fact, it ran over into the first day of Passover, meaning many Jewish students were home with their families and could not be present at the hearing. Rightly, many people called that out for being ridiculous. It was another example of Jewish culture being happily dismissed, even while the left trips over itself to denounce any perceived slight to all other minority cultures, which is why it was so interesting to see the liberal outrage over Spicer's comments. During my time in undergrad, more than 3,600 people, many of them Palestinian, died at the hands of Egyptian forces on the border of Gaza. Egypt bombed and/or evacuated 3,200 homes in the Palestinian city of Rafah, rendering thousands more Palestinians homeless. In Egypt itself, women were subjected to state-led virginity tests, essentially rapes by the state, and many thousands more underwent female genital mutilation. In Egypt, a man can legally beat his wife if he has good intention. In fact, in 2013, Egypt was dubbed the single worst country for women's rights, according to the Thomson Reuters Foundation. All of which was directly or indirectly made possible by the more than $1 billion the United States gives the Egyptian military every year. This, in addition to the billions of dollars we gave to countries like Pakistan and Iraq over my 4 years in college. We also sell many, many, many billions of dollars worth of military equipment to Saudi Arabia, a nation where Sharia law is used in lieu of a penal code, so hand amputation is a legal punishment for theft, where women can't drive, where women can't do much of anything without permission from a husband or brother or a father or, absent that, a son. During my freshman year, a 5-year-old Saudi girl was tortured and killed by her father because he doubted her virginity. This father served only a few months in jail before a judge ruled that he could pay the girl's mother and then be free to go. And he had to pay her only half of what he would have had to pay for the death of a boy. I never once saw students protest any of this, or ask that the U.S. boycott, sanction, and divest Egypt or Saudi Arabia for their crimes. It is possible that I simply missed these protests. What could not be missed, however, were the tens of protests against Israel. Israeli Apartheid Week, genocide protests, boycott, divest, sanction Israel. It is a microcosm of what seems to happen globally. Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, had this to say after she attended her first Security Council meeting. Quote, The Security Council is supposed to discuss how to maintain international peace and security. But at our meeting on the Middle East, the discussion was not about Hezbollah's illegal buildup of rockets in Lebanon. It was not about the money and weapons Iran provides to terrorists. It was not about how to defeat ISIS. It was not about how we hold Bashar al-Assad accountable for the slaughter of hundreds and thousands of civilians. No. Instead, the meeting focused on criticizing Israel, the one true democracy in the Middle East. I am new around here, but I understand that's how the council has operated month after month for decades." End quote. By the time I was 18, I had watched a lot of The Daily Show. So I had come to expect a certain amount of irrationality, disproportionate demonstrations of anger, and flat-out denial of facts from the right. The flagrant display of it on the left, however, was something I wasn't prepared for when I entered college. Now, I must say, I recently visited Tufts Students for Justice in Palestine Facebook page, and I found much of what they had to say relatively reasonable. More reasonable than the things I saw when I was a student there. Even still, it made me think. While we mock Sean Spicer for his bizarre, embarrassing, politically tone-deaf display last week, my thoughts turned to my university and to its new resolution as well. I love my alma mater, but it is also the place that taught me that the left can be as insensitive, under-researched, and wrong as the right it so loves to hate.